Rescued is a podcast of conversations with rescuers and those who've been rescued. It's about the lessons we learn about ourselves, the places we go and why, without judgment, to help us have better adventures, manage risk and deal with the unexpected. How many times have you heard of someone with a solid adventure resume being injured by something that seems pretty simple, like, stepping off a kerb or slipping over in the shower? Today's guest, Ross, is an experienced multi-day bushwalker, freediver and deer hunter who grew up with the snowy mountains on his doorstep and has spent a lifetime living and working in nature. In this episode, he takes us along on the Light to Light walk, which, compared to many of his past exploits, should have been a relatively straightforward 3-day walk with his family. The dreamy beachside campsites and wild rocky coastal platforms faded fast, the moment a wrong step left him unable to move his legs. The weather was closing in, there was no mobile phone coverage, and the nearest road was many kilometres away. It's lovely to meet you, Ross, and I'm really interested to hear your story because I sort of caught glimpses of it on Facebook and it certainly piqued my interest, and I think it's a story that's going to ring true for a lot of us who love spending time in nature and walking, getting out amongst it, doing things. Why don't you kick off by telling me a bit about your background in terms of what you like to do? Is it bushwalking, hiking, cycling, running, all the above? Do you have a favourite outdoor active child you can pick from?
Well, look, I enjoy all of those. They're not right at the moment, but sort of grew up on the Monero. My mum had been a very enthusiastic bushwalker and canoer. In fact, in the Sydney Bushwalking Club, she was a member in 1950.
Oh, wow, yeah. That was that era, wasn't it? When the rise of the bushwalking clubs or that sort of recreation type club in Australia in that sort of, I guess it sort of started in that 30s, 40s, 50s as the heyday, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. And it was, from what Mum was saying, that it was quite adventurous for young women to be involved in those sorts of activities. My first camping trip, she moved to Cooma in the early 1950s, and my father had come over from New Zealand to work on the snowy scheme. He'd been brought up in a sort of a more of a hunting, fishing sort of culture in New Zealand, and so they came together in Cooma, and we were very much imbued with that, spending a lot of time in nature. A lot of foraging, hunting and fishing and, field mushrooms and all sorts of things. So we were always eating stuff that came out of the bush.
For folks who don't know where or what the Monaro is, so we've got listeners from all around the world and that area of Cooma, Monaro. Are you able to explain just sort of big picture what it's like and sort of where it sits within, I guess also within the culture of Australia and the landscape?
Yeah, so the Monero extends it's in the southeast of New South Wales. It's tablelands country, so high and quite dry. It's a rain shadow from the snowy mountains. You'd describe it as semi-arid. People probably don't think of it that way because it is cold and gets snow and those sort of conditions over winter. Really interesting area, and obviously it was where the Snowy Mountains Authority was based in Cooma for the construction of the snowy scheme in the mountains, and that was very much part of my childhood, was travelling all over the mountains to go to various places where Dad was working.
So lots of opportunity for getting amongst it as you're growing up, and it sort of to be a part of the family and part of the stuff that came naturally to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember a very early trip in my early teens with my one of my sisters, who's just a bit older than me, and we did the Valentine Falls walk up from Guthaga, and we did it with Mum's gear, which was World War II disposals. It was an old A-frame pack and the old disposals tent, quite different. But when you're young and fit and excited, you just just carry the stuff.
And was that without your parents? So just you and your sister?
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting? Like we think these days, would we let 14, 15-year-olds go off by themselves onto the main range or the back country?
Yeah, probably not. Yeah. And, like scant, didn't even think about what misadventures could occur in terms of having contingencies and emergency equipment and that kind of thing in place.
Even that reflection back to your mum and your auntie, because it's like so much has changed technology-wise. And they used to have like these epic adventures that even by today's standards are pretty full on, but without all the lightweight gear, without the dehydrated food, without all this stuff. And, back in the day with the pillowcase as a backpack, for the hardcore types, and throwing it over their shoulder. And, some ways it's like, oh, have we all gone a bit soft, really?
Yeah, and look, I'm sure my mum would have done. She's a very frugal person still, and I'm sure she would have had, lots of just dried bits and pieces and dried fruit and that kind of thing. She would have, she would have done it on a fairly minimalist budget as well. They didn't have a lot of money in those days, and even, I remember talking to Mum once about what was her the biggest thing that had changed through her life, and she said plastic. She said there was no plastic when she was for much of her life. And when you think about how much we use plastic in our storage and hiking equipment, thank goodness a whole lot of that stuff just wouldn't be available. Our drinking bladders and all sorts of things that are made from plastic.
And our clothes too.
Yeah.
It was so much changed. So moving forward then from that introduction and that childhood in that area, what did your other adventures or activities pick in as you were getting older and in through your late teens and 20s and 30s? What other things did you get into?
Well, still doing a lot of adventuring, but quite often, spend a lot of time free diving off the far south coast down around Green Cape and Eden. We used to eat a lot of fish and abalone and stuff from down there. So, I remember going into one of the campsites that I stayed on the Light to Light, Mawarri Point. I remember going in there with my sisters camping and fishing. 45 years ago, we went in there when there was very little there. In fact, the campsite at Leather Jacket Bay, you're not allowed to camp there anymore, but it was very isolated, and we spent a week there, and the only things we saw were boats offshore. So yeah, sort of doing a lot of those kinds of adventures. Getting into, I do some adventure motorcycling, mountain bike riding and camping off mountain bikes has sort of featured a bit as well.
A lot of kilometres under your feet, like a lot of putting in that effort of one foot after the other, and a lot of on and off of backpacks and moving through different terrain all through your life.
Yeah, trying different things. My wife and I have done a little bit in the Budawangs as well, sort of more. Year before last, we were sort of training up a bit for a New Zealand trip, and we went to do the castle walk and got absolutely smashed by rain all day, and we ended up staying in a cave on that walk that was really good, actually. It was pouring rain outside, and we ended up sleeping in this cave and spent the night being raided by bush rats and bandicoots in there. So it was just wonderful experiences, and that's, I think, what we really love is just you never know what's going to happen.
You never know what's going to happen.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, and we were talking quite a lot there about your connection to this particular part of the world we're going to talk about. So this South Coast, you mentioned Green Cape, You mentioned Mawari Point, and this is all part of what's now called the Light to Light Walk. So could you just explain again to many of us who've maybe not been there, what is the Light to Light and what are the two lights and where is this placed?
The national park is right down at the southern part of New South Wales on the Victorian border. It goes down, the park goes down to the border, and there's a large cape that comes out at that point called Green Cape. And at the southern head of Twofold Bay is a tower called Boyd Tower, and it's now a 3-day walk with 2 overnight stops on the way. And you have to sort of either use a shuttle bus service or arrange to have a vehicle at either end of the walk.
I mean, it's an amazing part of the world, and I had the opportunity of walking it last year and really enjoyed it. And I guess the outcome and what's there today is that none of that big infrastructure, all those cabins, none of that eventuated.
Yeah, no, it's all very low key. Infrastructure now with some pit toilets with a rainwater tank off the roof, so you can get some water there, and camping platforms, that kind of infrastructure. But otherwise, they've kept it pretty low key, and it's still a wonderful location.
How would you describe the actual walking, the terrain you're on, and the difficulty of this 3-day walk that you set out to do?
I don't think it's a particularly difficult walk. You're on the coast, so there's ups and downs. There's some boulder, rock garden or boulder kind of fields where you're crossing areas that are right adjacent to the coast, and some rock platforms. You go through a mix of forest and heath, but the track's really well marked and I think really well constructed, like good stairs and that sort of thing where there's more difficult bits.
Who was with you, and when was this? What time of the year was this?
So this was November, towards the end of November, and I was with my wife, eldest daughter, and a friend of my eldest daughter. So the 4 of us were doing the 3-day walk.
And what's the nearest town to the northern end?
The nearest town is Eden, so that's where you sort of stock up on any last minute stuff you might need.
So take us to the start of the walk and how it sort of opened for you and your group before the thing you never expected happened.
We headed off from Boyd Tower. It's not a long walk to the first campsite at Mawari, so you've got plenty of time to organise your vehicles and things. And we had a sandwich at Boyd Tower, and then headed off for the afternoon walk to get to Mawari Point. Pretty mild conditions, perfect, really.
And so as the afternoon rolled on and you were heading towards Mawari, were there other people there when you arrived?
Yeah, there was a couple of other parties at Mawari, and it's a delightful sort of camping area. So we got there and we had one of the wooden platform things we'd booked. So we set up our tents on that when we arrived, and then went down to the beach and all had a swim. It was pretty fresh, yeah. It was, but when you've been walking, like if there's water, I'll get in it, and and then had a nice evening at the campsite at Mawari, and when you wake up in the morning, there were just quite a big mob of kangaroos in and around the campsite, and some wallabies as well around fairly close.
So tell me about day 2 then. How was that?
Once again, a really nice day. A little bit more rock platform walking. We spent quite a bit of time sort of having breaks on rock platforms because there was some whale action offshore. So we were enjoying sort of sitting and watching some of that while we were having lunch. We got to the campsite we booked. It used to be really, really nice, but it's quite heavily, the regrowth's quite thick around where they've put in the platforms. And so we opted to keep going through to salt water because we were there at about 3 in the afternoon and we had plenty of time to get through to salt water, and we figured that would give us a shorter final day walk out.
So salt water is not sort of part of the official walk, is it? It's a different campground. Can you explain a bit about that?
Yeah, the official walk has sort of lists 2 campgrounds, but there are other campgrounds there that you can also book if you want to do it your own way. So we sort of waited till we got a bit of phone reception and booked another campground at another spot at Saltwater once we'd decided we were going to press on. Like, it was lovely evening, but we knew the change was coming through during the night. So we set up our tents, and I also had a fly with me that I set up so that we'd have somewhere to leave our gear and to climb out and get under in the morning when it was going to be pouring, and it was. So it started raining in the early hours, and it was a pretty wet night.
Yeah, so no surprises there with the weather. What happened the next day, which was your last day?
Yeah, so the next day we had, we packed up in the rain. There's some good shelter sheds there, so we were able to pull the pegs out of our tents and carry them up under the roof and sort of do a mix of getting wet and packing up under some shelter. But as you do when your last day, you're just shoving stuff in your bag that's all wet. Resigned to the fact that you're going to have to do a big clean up and dry out of gear when you get home.
It's wild country down there, especially when the waves and the wind is coming onshore, and it's kind of the place that sort of feels like you're in the weather.
Yeah, very much so. And I mean, on the other side of Green Cape is the aptly named Disaster Bay, where I think back in the day when sailing boats were coming up around the coast, they'd hit some pretty violent weather around that part of the coast, and some of them would sort of see this bay opening up and duck in it for shelter, but it's full of reefs, and hence why it's called Disaster Bay. Yeah, very wild part of the coast,
which is so contrast to the colour of the water in some of those campground bays like Mawarri, where on a good day it's almost like tropical island turquoise kind of watercolour.
Absolutely. Mawarri Beach is just delightful when it's, when the weather's nice. Current stays in April, May down the far south coast, so the water can be quite warm, and if you get a bit of sunshine, it looks tropical and the water's quite nice.
One thing I wanted to ask is there's a term that we use quite a lot in bushwalking, which is called rock hopping. How would you explain what that is?
Rock hopping is where you're travelling across something you'd describe as a rock garden or a boulder field, where you can't actually put your foot on the ground in between rocks. You're really hopping from the top of one boulder to another. It's easy to lose your footing, and you have to be fairly careful even when it's dry. Sometimes the rocks that you're hopping on, even though they might look stable, they can rock when you jump on them. They're not stable. Because quite often these things are in coves or bays where they're very much affected by big seas. So they get moved around and relocated. So yeah, it's that sort of jumping from rock to rock.
Is there a bit of that on the Light to Light walk?
There is. There's a few patches where you're crossing boulder-strewn coves where you're rock hopping.
Take us to day 3 then.
Yeah, so day 3 we headed off in the rain and the wind. It was quite a change from the previous day. So we were in wet weather gear. I generally just stay in shorts when it's raining, skin being fairly waterproof, and just had a raincoat. Pretty cool and quite wild, and it was really quite spectacular. We were really enjoying just the drama of the coast. So yeah, we were walking along, stopping and looking at various views. and some of that was sort of onto rock platforms, and we were chatting away while we were sort of walking, and we were probably about 5 hours from the car when I had my misadventure.
Massive thanks for the support from the team at Paddy Palin, who since 1930 have been leaders in travel and outdoor adventure. In fact, did you know that Paddy himself, a member of the Sydney Bushwalkers Club, was a volunteer in the original search and rescue arm of the Federation of Bushwalking Clubs in New South Wales? Nice one, Paddy. What happened?
My wife was just in front of me, and as far as I can sort of reconstruct it, because these things happen a little dramatically, I was coming through some tea tree onto a rock platform. The rock platform looked to me to be even, that it was a uniform rock with one colour of rock and lichen on it, but sort of immediately past the tea tree where it opened up, it was actually another piece of the same rock sitting on top of that rock platform. So they looked identical, and I didn't see that there was a couple of foot drop off between that piece and the next piece. I sort of went around the tea tree, saw the rock platform, and I think just sort of looked out to see it at the view, and kept walking. And stepped straight off this couple of foot drop with my pack on my back.
Oh.
I didn't bang myself falling over or anything. I didn't sort of bang my head or arms or anything. I just went down pretty severely. I remember looking at my knee and thinking that doesn't look right.
What did you see when you looked at your knee?
Well, a big hole behind my right kneecap, basically, where the quadricep. I could have put my fist in behind my knee. It looked horrendous, and I wasn't sure what I'd done at that point. So I was sort of lying on the ground, and it was a bit painful. And I said to my wife, "Oh, look, I think I'm going to pass out." So I did for about a minute, and then came to, and it was sort of quite clear that I'd gone from having very functional legs to not being able to move either leg, no leg function at all.
Yeah, but at this stage you had no idea what the injury was. You just saw these gaping holes above your knees.
Well, thankfully, when I fainted, it had all kind of snapped back a bit and gone more into bruising and swelling mode. So they just sort of looked horrible, but I couldn't move them. So I'm sitting on my bum on a rock platform with wind and rain coming in straight off the ocean. And so we sort of thought, oh, we've got to get a little bit more sheltered and comfortable. So I was able to just slide on my bottom and my hands back up to a rock that had a bit of tea tree overhanging it, and then my wife and daughter and her friend got busy and got the fly and put the fly up over me, and we had an emergency blanket and more dry gear. So I had a dry bag with with some thermals and stuff in it. So I took that out and got rugged up and put my sleeping bag around my legs once we were sort of under cover, and set off the personal locator beacon.
Wow. So did you have, my first thought was, where's your pack? Because you stepped off that, you said like about a 2-foot drop, was it?
Yeah, so my pack was still on my back when I landed, and then we took that off while I slid back up to the rocks, but we had it handy.
Yeah.
There. And I've carried a locator beacon for many years. Now I've first got one. I was actually hunting in New Zealand, in the far south of New Zealand, and near Tapanui, and I was in the mountains there, and I'd gone down a ridge line, and and then slipped in some crown fern and slid about 50 metres down a pretty steep slope. And at the bottom of that, I was just sitting there thinking, if I'd have just broken a leg, they would have found a skeleton at some point. It was a really isolated spot. And so after that, I bought a locator beacon and thought, I've got to have one of these with me all the time.
So there was no phone coverage here, is that correct, where you were?
Yeah, no phone reception where we were. There was phone reception not that far away, but we didn't know that. So letting off the locator beacon was the right thing to do. And within an hour, we heard a helicopter overhead. So the Westpac rescue helicopter had been at Maria Airport, and they got the message to come and have a look.
So what time of day was this?
This was about 10 o'clock in the morning.
But in not great weather conditions?
No, it was quite windy and scats of rain coming through. So we could hear the helicopter, and it was sort of circling for a bit, and then it managed to set someone down on a rock on the rock platform nearby, who came over and was able to provide some assistance. I should say, just before the helicopter came, actually a guided tour, I think it was Sapphire Coast guided tours, they came through, and the guide with them was really helpful as well. He was just a really calm guy who'd had some recent training in wilderness first aid, so he kind of gave a little bit more advice on rugging up, and I'd run out of gas for the jet boil, so he left us his jet boil gas. So I was able to start heating up water and getting some hot tea into me to sort of fend off hypothermia and shock a bit.
So what about your pain level at this point? Like you said, initially it was so bad that you'd passed out. Did that dissipate and reduce?
Yeah, it wasn't too bad after the initial pain, so I was able to move myself up the rock, and I was okay. Able to sort of make myself cups of tea and that sort of stuff while we were waiting for help to arrive.
So the Westpac set down. Was it a paramedic who came to help?
Yeah, it was a paramedic. They weren't sure if I was in the water or not, because the signal from the PLB was obviously right on the coastline. So he was actually in a wetsuit and ready to jump out of the helicopter to do an ocean rescue.
Wow.
But yeah, they saw us on the shore, and he came in and was able to get in communication with the emergency services and to have a chat to me and provide some assistance and start to think through how they were going to extract me. They were thinking of the helicopter being able to sort of lift me off the rock platform and put me over to where the nearest four-wheel drive track came in, which was Pulpit Rock, a couple of kilometres away. But the weather just turned further, so it was too windy and rainy for the helicopter to come back, basically. He had to walk out in the end as well.
Oh, in his wetsuit.
In his wetsuit, yeah.
Wow, so helicopter's gone. That's not an option anymore. And you're a few Ks from a four-wheel drive track.
Yeah.
How did they get you out?
Yeah, look, it was the emergency services were just fantastic. There was a couple of National Parks and Wildlife Service staff were at the site very quickly, and they were once again really calming and helpful. And they also that SES and ambulance were on the way. So that was very comforting. And not too long after that, the SES out of Eden and the ambulance and the police arrived. So there was a lot of people turned up, which was very comforting once again. And the SES and the police and ambulance stretchered me out. They had a stretcher that had essentially a huge mountain bike wheel underneath it.
Ah, a terror tamer.
Oh, is that what it's called?
Yeah. Terror tamer, yeah. And they've got brakes on them too.
Yeah,
some of them.
Yeah. No, it had brakes and it. So they got me in there. I'm not a small person, so it took 6 people on that to wheel me out, and it was across pretty rugged rock platform and boulder
Yeah, wow.
field to get me out. And look, I was, by that stage, the ambulance officer had given me some fentanyl, so I was probably in the best spirits of anyone after at that point.
And did they have some ideas about and talk with you about what they thought you had done in terms of an injury?
Not really. They weren't sure what was going on, other than I couldn't operate the lower half of my legs, and so they just splintered my legs. They had temporary splints, and splintered my legs to keep them in a reasonable state, and then stretchered me out.
Yeah. So, who had to carry your pack?
My daughter and her friend had walked out while we were waiting for the rescue to go and get our car, and they were getting a bit cold too, so they got to the car, and they came back and carried my pack out.
So, how long did that take? Because I'm just trying to imagine the journey back. Like you said, it would have been a lot of really difficult terrain.
So, look, I can't recall exactly when I sort of work it back. I think I got to Bega Hospital by about 5 o'clock or something that night. So it would have been, so sort of total of seven-ish hours since the incident happened. So it would have been a couple of hours on site, and then a couple of hours to get me to the four-wheel drive, I'd imagine.
What was going through your head while you were lying there, or were you in a fentanyl fantasy land?
Well, that sort of, they only gave me that when they got me in the stretcher, because they thought it was going to be fairly bumpy, and it was. And they thought that might hurt a bit. So look, it was. I guess I was kind of in that numb state of not really knowing what was happening. I was quite obviously pretty concerned about where, how badly damaged my legs were. I'd never experienced having total loss of leg function before,
Yeah.
and what I'd sort of seen was concerning me, that I wouldn't be able to walk properly again. But extremely grateful to the emergency services folks. They were just they were really professional. They were just lovely and calm, and we had quite good rapport on the way out, really, just amongst them. And they were all operating really well together. It was just great to see how well served we are by our emergency services. And a lot of them are volunteers. The SES folks in particular are volunteers, but they were all just fabulous. I was extremely grateful. And at one point I remember I just said, look, there seems to be so many people have turned up, and the National Parks person said, look, when it's this isolated, we tend to over-resource it because it takes too many hours to get more resources if it's under-resourced, and so that sort of explained the amount of people that had turned up.
Yeah. And what was happening for your wife at this time?
Well, she was obviously pretty concerned about my state, and had been pretty worried up until the point that the emergency services arrived. When you set off a locator beacon, you don't really know what's happening. It's just got a little red flashing light. So hearing the beat of a helicopter overhead was a huge relief to her in the first place. We're obviously a bit concerned about our daughter and her friend as well. They were quite, it's an exposed place, and when you're hiking, you're fine, but when you stop somewhere in that kind of rain and wind, hypothermia is a risk for everyone. So she was worried about them as well. Thankfully, they're very fit, so they were able to get out and come back in and carry the pack out and do all of those sort of things.
What do you think, when you think about your experience of all the adventures and the trips you'd been on, and moments in your past where things maybe hadn't gone right, do you think there was things from the past that contributed and meant that you had a better experience?
Yeah, I think certainly having been in fairly isolated and extreme spots. I do a bit by myself, and I do a bit of deer hunting in New Zealand and in Australia, where I'm going into very isolated country on my own. And I'm sort of acutely aware that if something goes wrong, I need a locator beacon, I need dry clothes, I need emergency blankets. So I think having thought those things through and having them on me all the time is really important. I learn a couple of extra lessons, as you do from this experience, and that's that one emergency blanket's probably not enough when you're in really extreme conditions. I had an insulated air mattress which we put underneath me as well to sort of stop heat loss into the wet ground. But the paramedic with the Westpac helicopter had a couple of emergency blankets as well, and I ended up with three of them. One sort of in under my raincoat, and one around my legs, and one underneath me. So a few little extra bits like that, I think are important. But having your base gear right, and if you're in wet conditions, or you're expecting wet conditions, making sure that you've got some dry gear in a dry bag. And in New Zealand, I'd always had, thermals and a beanie in a dry bag. I'd sleep in at night, and I'd also then have it back in the dry bag and ready if it was needed.
Do you have a personal story about an incident or rescue during an outdoor trip when something didn't quite go to plan? Maybe you got lost, injured, let down by some gear, preparation, or something else. Look, honestly, it can happen to any of us at any time, regardless of how experienced we are. And it's by sharing these stories and tales that we can all learn and help to avoid them in the future. So if that's you, I'd love to hear from you. So please drop me an email to rescued@lotsoffreshair.com. That's rescued with a D. Let's go back to Bega Hospital, which you said you got there about 5 o'clock. What happened when you got there?
When I got to the four-wheel drive ambulance, and the ambulance staff were just great, but it was a four-wheel drive ambulance that took me out to the tar road, which was probably about half an hour, three-quarters of an hour drive until you're out on the edge.
More bouncing around.
Yeah, lots of bouncing around in that. And then into a normal ambulance. And, once again, what fantastic emergency services we have. I was, whilst bouncing around in the back of ambulances, I was given an ECG and lots of assessment, make sure that I was stable and okay. And then got to Bega Hospital, and once again, just lovely staff at Bega Hospital. They were fantastic. I was pretty quickly sent for an X-ray, and a very experienced radiographer there was able to, just gave me some comfort in that there hadn't been a lot of bone damage go on. A couple of bits of kneecap had come off with the muscle, but not sort of major breaks or anything like that, or damage to the joints. So that was quite good. And then I was sort of just stabilised and fed and in a nice bed. So that was good, but still, pretty concerned without knowing what was actually wrong with my legs. And it wasn't until the next morning when an orthopaedic surgeon came to see me, and I had an ultrasound as well that finally sort of found out what the issue, what had actually happened to my legs. I think the ultrasound, the report said wildly detached quadriceps.
Not just one, but two.
Yeah, both legs. So bilateral quadricep detachment, I think, was the technical term.
So could you put that into layman's terms for us? Like what's come off from where?
So basically the top muscle on your thighs that attaches to your kneecap, and it essentially is the weight-bearing muscle for bending your legs. So when you put your hand on your thigh, that big muscle there had torn entirely off my kneecaps on both sides. So the tendons across there were just ripped off.
Wow. So Ross, this is now 5 months since that incident.
Yeah.
What has happened between?
Yeah, the Bega orthopedic surgeon explained what had happened, and he said, look, they could undertake the procedure there, but given I lived in Canberra and there was such a long recovery, that I was better off transferring up to Canberra, which is the tertiary hospital to Bega. It's the sort of big regional hospital. So Monday night I was transferred up from Bega Hospital to Canberra Hospital, and about midnight I got woken up by an orthopedic surgeon who sort of asked me a whole lot of questions and said I was going to be in surgery the next morning. And so Tuesday morning I went into surgery, essentially reattached my quadriceps. So they drill holes in my kneecaps and then stitch the tendons through those holes back onto the kneecaps. And I had 38 staples. I think they had to sort of open my knees up quite a bit to get in there and do all of that. Yeah, and then into recovery. So I was about 10 days in hospital in braces. By the end of that, I was able to weight bear, so I could sort of get up and with a frame shuffle around a bit to go to the bathroom and that kind of thing. But obviously, no leg bending at all. And then it's been quite an interesting few months. So the occupational therapy people at the hospital and the physios were also really good. They came and assessed my house. I live in a little 2-story townhouse, and getting upstairs just wasn't an option. So they fitted the house out for me with a hospital bed downstairs and a frame and a chair and a stool for my legs and what's called a leg lifter, which because I couldn't lift my legs at all, I had to hook this thing over both feet to be able to move my feet around at all, and a toilet riser. So all of these things that you sort of take for granted, I've got a new appreciation for accessibility issues because I was very much, I needed a ramp to get into the back door, which is sort of only about a 4-inch step. I couldn't get over a 4-inch kind of step.
Wow.
For the first while. And then, it was very, very sort of sedentary. The first 6 weeks were just in straight splints with no bending at all while that initial tendon healing took place. And then I went into a set of what they call radius of movement braces that you could adjust how much I could bend my legs, and it started off at 10 degrees, and then over the next 6 weeks progressively went through to 90 degrees. That came off on the 20th of February. Those braces came off, and I've been able to, just increase my mobility since then. So I'm on quite a sort of a daily physio routine to try and build my leg strength back up. So quadriceps not being used for 3 months essentially have really atrophied quite a lot. So I've got these skinny little legs and big bony kneecaps now. When I sleep on my side, I have to put a pillow between my knees because they're banging on each other because there's no muscle there. But it's sort of building it back up and getting amazing progress every few days. I sort of think, oh gee, I couldn't do that 3 or 4 days ago, and now I can. So I'm able to go for 4 or 5 kilometre walks on flat paths. I went and bought a exercise bike from the tip shop, which has lots of them, and put that in the backyard. So I've got to do some cycling and lots of quad exercises and those sorts of things. So on the way back.
Yeah, on the way back. So, I mean, it still seems like such a long time. Like, everything's relative, but, for an injury 5 months ago, it still feels like a lot of water under the bridge to get to the point where you can walk, like you said, 5Ks on flat ground. Can you talk about the other part that needs to heal, or the other stuff you go through when you've got an injury. Like, there's the physical part, but especially for someone who's been so active and so used to moving around, how did you handle the other side?
Yeah, look, it's I guess a lot goes through your mind when you're in that sort of a circumstance with a long recovery. I've just been so grateful that I will be able to walk again. It was very confronting to me that I might not be able to do bushwalking and hiking in particular, which is what I absolutely love. I don't know if I'll be able to run again. And I'll have to, I'll see what happens with that. I think I'll be able to cycle again. So that to me was a very positive sort of incentive. I just felt very privileged to be in a country that has such great healthcare available to me. And I guess, I've always taken my legs so much for granted as these things that just operate, when you're slugging through the bush and carrying stuff. And yeah, so I appreciate them a lot more. And I was just trying to stay very positive about, about that journey. I got quite frustrated when the braces came off, because I sort of thought, that the braces will be off and I'll be, leaping and jumping around the place. But it's really just coming back to earth and grounding myself and going, no, this is this is a long slog. It's going to take another 3 months at least to get back to a reasonable state of leg function. My wife's been fantastic. She's a really positive person and a very keen chef. So she's been doing sort of, right through that period. She was doing weekly food plans that were very healthy, lots of fish and protein and vegetables and all of that stuff to keep. I've had lots of friends dropping in and seeing me, which has been wonderful, and dropping off piles of books. I've been sort of doing a whole lot of reading and just trying to keep positive around around those things, and not dwell too much on being sedentary. I'm a very outdoors person, and it's been pretty interesting being essentially confined to one part of the house for quite a while.
So can you drive?
I can drive now, yeah. So I've been down the coast for a bit and sort of able to go out on the beach and throw a line in the water. Didn't catch anything, but it was just nice to be there and to be able to sort of begin to walk around in the bush a little bit. I'm not very stable on slopes or rough terrain, but I can navigate it slowly. So just sort of getting out and starting to do some of that, and then right through, I've been very focused on just doing my physio, doing what I'm told by the professionals, and being rigorous about it. A couple of times I overdid it a bit, trying to get a bit too enthusiastic, and that sort of ended up with swelling my knees right up and having to sit there with a bag of frozen peas on them for quite a while, thinking, just reminding myself to do what I'm told and be patient. Just to take it as it comes and do the physio. So I'm seeing a good physiotherapist at the moment, and he's got me on a good program, and I'll just stick to that.
Yeah. So what's the prognosis from here then?
Well, the prognosis is it's not a common injury. So when I kind of have a look into it, there's sort of mixed stuff, but the prognosis is pretty good. My tendons are fully healed, but probably not at 100% strength. But that's okay, because I'm not doing any high jumping with them or anything. And so the prognosis is really that I should have greater than 90% function by the 12-month sort of point. And I'd imagine that as things improve on a kind of a weekly basis at the moment, I'd imagine that I'll be walking quite well within, within a couple of months. I'll be back sort of having some nice little day walks and things like that. I'm hoping.
Ah, sounds great. So I have a couple of questions,
Yeah.
and one of them, one is actually a logistical one. And I'm so curious, when you couldn't bend your legs, how do you even, were you housebound? Because you can't get in a car if you can't bend your legs.
That's right. So I had these splints on that held my legs straight, so I could walk in a stilt-like fashion with a frame or with crutches. Not able to lift my feet much at all, sort of almost sliding them along the ground. And for my hospital visits, my wife would take me to the car, and we had a slide sheet from the hospital that we put on the back seat. And I'd sort of put my bottom on the edge of the back seat, and my wife would lift my feet up and then shove me backwards and I'd slide a lot across the seat and sit sideways, and then the reverse of that at the hospital to go to an appointment. So quite awkward not being able to bend your legs, and it was only really when I could get to the 90 degrees with the braces that I could sit in the front seat of the car to go to my last sort of appointment when they took the braces off. Pretty much stuck at home for 6 weeks, other than going out to the hospital.
Were the doctors able to explain to you how the injury happened in terms of mechanically? Was it a force, or what actually created the injury?
Yeah, so I guess it's a massive force on the quadriceps from the shock of coming off that height with a backpack on, and the quadriceps trying to stop my legs from buckling, so tensing up to stop buckling, and it just happening with so much force and so quickly that the tendons just tore through. Part of it, this sort of injury affects people more of my age, because you're losing elasticity in your tendons as well. In fact, I was mentioning that castle walk to you that my wife and I did, and when we were coming out of that, I remember watching a group of young guys that had camped further out from us came past us, and there was a bit of boulder hopping involved, or off boulders down onto the track, and they were just sort of leaping and bounding with their packs on and chatting and shot past us. And and my days of jumping off rocks onto the ground are long gone, because there's no elasticity there. You sort of feel like your pelvis is exploding in two directions when you jump more than a foot or so. So I think that the combination of that massive force, and then being older, just having lost elasticity in tendons, meant that they tore rather than being able to absorb the shock.
Amazing. One of the questions that comes up quite a lot is linked to your comments about how lucky we are to be here in a country that has such great healthcare system and support around us. And it's linked to the question of insurance and the cost of rescues and that kind of thing. Were you covered by ambulance insurance, or how did that work for you?
So I've got hospital cover insurance that includes ambulance cover. And so that covered the ambulance costs came in at about $1,800, which seems incredibly cheap to me for an isolated rescue and two professional staff as part of that. Everything else was through the public system. Being a traumatic emergency incident, I was just sort of pushed through the system without any costs, basically.
Amazing. We are so lucky. So thinking now where you are, you've got this goal ahead of you with your daily physio and the sort of set plan to get you to the place you want to be. What's changed for you, and what have you learnt through this journey, do you think?
Well, I've certainly learnt to appreciate the functionality of being able to to walk, and also trying to be. I think the sort of term for it is more mindful of experiences as I'm doing them, and to look at the positives and the pleasure from it. Like, it was, the Light to Light walk was absolutely fabulous up until that moment, and I still remember a lot of it very, very fondly. And I'm sort of hoping my wife and daughter and a friend do as well, because you sort of end up with the only memory being the traumatic kind of event rather than enjoying it. And I'm really looking forward to being able to do some of that again. So I think my first outing will probably be an overnight hike next spring or summer in the snowy mountains, and we'll pick somewhere that's not too far or too rugged, but just have a nice walk up there, and go to a river and camp somewhere overnight, and then walk back out again. So I'm just really looking forward to being able to do that. And I think I've always been a little overly optimistic at times about my ability and pushing it a bit in the bush. So just being, say, more mindful, enjoy and savour the experience more, and just be careful and take my time a little more.
Is there anything you want to mention that we haven't talked about already?
Always have the right gear is important. I still think for Australians, that snake bite is one of it's not frequent, but if it happens, you really need to immobilise yourself straight away. And you if you need antivenin really quickly. So personal locator beacons and immobilisation are really, really important. The fatalities that we have tend to be people who take more than about 4 hours to get help, or are unable to immobilise themselves, and that's so that one's always sort of top of mind. But then hypothermia and those sort of misadventures are a real concern. A friend of mine in New Zealand had to be pulled out of the West Coast with a helicopter with hypothermia because of a series of misadventures that he had walking. So yeah.
And my last question is your beacon. So you had a PLB, you set it off.
Yep.
Did the manufacturer replace it for you, or the battery?
They replaced the beacon. So I did a little story for their website, so Ocean Signal, with a Rescue Me personal locator beacon. Sent them that with some photos. They've published that on their website, and when they do that, they send you a new beacon, and I sent my old one back to them. So I've got a brand new beacon which will last me another 7 years.
Well, hopefully you won't have to use that.
Yeah, hopefully I won't have to use it again.
Oh, look, it's been so nice hearing your story, Ross, and to hear you speak of these places that you clearly know and you love so much. That go deep into your story and your history. Thank you so much for sharing them with us, and for the story of what happened, and that incredible process to have you where you are now, 5 months down the track, and just all the best for the next 5 months. And I look forward to seeing photos of you out in the snowies on your first overnight hike in the not too distant future.
Great, thanks, Carol. And I look forward to getting back out there. And I think that sort of, always being kind of forward-looking on what are the good things coming, and being able to get out in the bush is just such an important part of that. Like I suppose, like a lot of people my age, we're right into bird watching, and there's never a shortage of birds when you get out in the bush, and it's just a great thing to do.
Apparently, it's not just for folks of our certain age at the moment, Ross. It's the young folk today. They are, flocking to birding, which is really exciting, really exciting.
There's always something to see. It's great.
Yeah, we just have to slow down and be quiet enough and be still enough to listen and to look and find them. So it's all around us. If you've enjoyed this powerful story, or one of the many others from my super generous guests, you can help more people connect and hear these valuable lessons simply by leaving a 5-star review. And why not even click that little share button on your podcast app and help your outdoorsy mates find it too. The Rescued podcast is produced on the unceded lands of the Gundungurra people of the Blue Mountains of New South Wales. I pay my respects to the elders past and present and acknowledge their enduring connection to and care for country. Special thanks to our sponsors, Paddy Palin. This has been a Lots of Fresh Air production.